The Veilrith Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they had never known defeat. Their empire stretched across 37 star systems, and their name was spoken with fear on every world that knew of them. They were ancient when humanity was still learning to make fire, and they believed themselves eternal. When their warships first appeared in Earth's sky, humanity did not understand what they were seeing. The massive vessels blocked out the sun and cast shadows over entire continents. Within hours, the Veilrith commander broadcast a simple message to every screen and radio on the planet. You will submit or you will burn. Most species in the galaxy chose submission. They saw the Veilrith fleet, and they understood that resistance meant death. They knelt and they survived, even if survival meant slavery. The Veilrith expected humans to do the same because every species before them had made that choice. But humanity did not kneel. The war began on a Tuesday morning when a farmer in Kansas fired a hunting rifle at a Veilrith soldier. The shot bounced harmlessly off the alien's armor, but it started something that would burn for 11 years. Within a week, every nation on Earth had unified against the invaders, and the resistance was born. The Veilrith had better weapons and stronger ships and technology that humans could not even understand. They bombed cities into dust and turned forests into ash. They killed millions in the first month alone, and they expected humanity to break. But the humans did not break. They just learned to hide better. General Marcus Vance became the face of the resistance. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a voice that could make soldiers believe they might actually win. His wife Yellen worked beside him, coordinating spy networks across occupied territories. Together, they led humanity's desperate fight against an enemy that should have crushed them in days. But Marcus Vance had a secret, something even his closest officers did not know. While the resistance fought and bled and died in the streets, a different war was being waged in the shadows. Scientists worked in hidden bunkers deep beneath mountains, building something called Protocol Prometheus. The name came from an old myth about stealing fire from the gods. The project was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Thousands of small drones, each no bigger than a grain of sand, were launched into space. They rode on debris and meteorites and anything else that could slip past Veilrith sensors. Their destination was every planet the Veilrith owned. These tiny machines burrowed deep into the worlds they reached. They nestled into fault lines and magma chambers. They attached themselves to power cores and reactor systems. And then they waited, silent and patient, for a signal that might never come. The Veilrith never found them because they never thought to look. Why would they search for grains of sand when they were busy crushing an entire species under their heel? Years passed and the war grew worse for humanity. City by city, the resistance lost ground. General Vance was reported killed in a bombing raid, though his body was never found. His wife Yellen went underground, continuing the fight even as hope faded. But the Vances had one more secret, one that broke their hearts every single day. Their son Eli, just 12 years old, had been trained since childhood for a specific purpose. He knew what he was, and he had accepted it with a bravery that no child should ever need. Eli was captured on purpose. His mother let the Veilrith find him because the plan required it. She kissed him goodbye in a dark basement and told him she was proud of him, and then she let him walk into enemy hands. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. High Commander Zorville was pleased when he learned they had captured the son of Marcus Vance. Here was the perfect symbol of humanity's defeat. He would execute the boy on live broadcast and show every species in the galaxy what happened to those who defied the Dominion. The execution was scheduled for noon on a clear day in the ruins of Geneva. Once it had been a beautiful city of diplomacy and peace. Now it was rubble and ash, the perfect backdrop for Veilrith cruelty. Cameras were set up to broadcast across all 37 systems. Eli was brought to the platform in chains. He was small for his age with dark hair and his mother's sharp eyes. The Valrith soldiers expected him to cry or beg, but he did neither. He walked with his head high like a soldier marching to his post. Billions watched across the galaxy as Zorvel gave his speech. His voice was cold and triumphant as he spoke of Valrith's superiority and human weakness. He talked about order and submission and the eternal reign of the Dominion. He believed every word he said. "Let this be the final lesson," Zorvel declared to the cameras, his alien face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Humanity kneels or humanity dies. There is no other choice. There has never been another choice." The crowd of Valrith soldiers cheered. Victory felt complete. The troublesome humans had finally been broken. Then Eli spoke, his young voice cutting through the noise with strange calm. He looked directly into the broadcast lens, directly at every screen across the Dominion, and he said 7 words that no one understood. "You should not have let us see the stars," Zorvel laughed. What did the words of a child matter? He raised his hand and gave the signal. A Valrith soldier lifted his plasma rifle and fired. The bolt struck true and Eli Vance fell. The broadcast continued. Zorvel turned back to the cameras to deliver his final statement. He felt powerful and righteous and certain that the universe had been reminded of its place. He did not know that the broadcast signal was racing outward at the speed of light. He did not know that it would reach certain hidden receivers in exactly 8 minutes. He did not know that a dead boy was now a key turning in a lock that would open the gates of hell. 8 minutes, the time it takes light to travel from Earth to the nearest relay station. 8 minutes, the gap between cause and effect. 8 minutes, the last peaceful moments the Valrith Dominion would ever know. Eli had known. He had counted down the seconds in his head as he stood on that platform. He had not been afraid because fear was for people who did not know their purpose. Eli knew exactly what he was: a trigger, a signal, a match held to a fuse that stretched across the galaxy. His mother had told him the truth when he was 8 years old. She had cried as she explained it, and he had hugged her and told her it was okay. "Someone has to do it," he had said, with the simple wisdom of a child who understood sacrifice. "I am glad it gets to be me." Now he was gone and the signal was flying, and somewhere in the dark between stars, ancient machines began to wake. The Valrith had made a mistake, the kind of mistake that ends empires. They had assumed that breaking humanity meant defeating humanity. They had never considered that humans might choose to lose every battle and still win the war. 8 minutes began to count down, and the galaxy held its breath without knowing why. High Commander Zorvel was still speaking to the cameras when his aide rushed onto the platform with terror in his eyes. The young officer's hands were shaking and his voice cracked as he tried to form words. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Commander," the aide gasped. "Valrith Prime, our homeworld, the sky has turned white." Zorvel did not understand. How could the sky turn white? What did that even mean? He grabbed the aide by the collar and demanded an explanation. But the aide had no explanation, only more impossible reports flooding through his communicator. Across the Dominion, on every planet they owned, the same thing was happening. The ground was shaking and mountains were cracking open. Oceans were boiling and cities were collapsing into sinkholes that had appeared from nowhere. It was as if the planets themselves had decided to die. Zorvel ran to the command center, his triumphant speech forgotten. Screens showed chaos from every corner of his empire. Valrith Prime, the jewel of their civilization, was being torn apart by volcanic eruptions on a scale never seen before. The capital city was already gone, swallowed by a river of magma that had burst from beneath the streets. "How is this possible?" Zorvel screamed at his officers. "We have no enemies capable of this. No weapon exists that could do this." But a weapon did exist, and humanity had spent 11 years putting it in place. The tiny drones that had burrowed into every Veilrith world were finally awake. They had received the signal, the broadcast of a human child's execution, and they had activated their payloads. Each drone was small, but they had positioned themselves perfectly. They triggered earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. They overloaded reactor cores and destabilized antimatter storage facilities. One drone could do nothing. 100 could crack a mountain. 1,000,000 could tear a planet apart from the inside. The Veilrith had never found the drones because they were looking for weapons that came from outside. They searched the skies for enemy fleets and scanned space for incoming missiles. They never thought to look beneath their own feet. They never imagined that the threat was already inside every world they owned. 37 star systems began to burn. Some planets died quickly in massive explosions that left nothing but asteroid fields. Others died slowly as their atmospheres filled with ash and their surfaces became seas of fire. The death toll climbed into the billions within the first hour. Zorvil watched his empire crumble on a dozen screens, and he could not process what he was seeing. This was not war. This was extinction. This was not defeat. This was erasure. How could the humans have done this? They were primitive. They were beaten. They were nothing. Then he remembered the boy's final words. "You should not have let us see the stars." The words made sense now in the worst possible way. Humanity had looked up at the stars and seen not wonder, but targets. They had looked at the Veilrith Empire and seen not an unbeatable enemy, but a problem that needed solving. They had spent 11 years preparing their solution. Reports came in from the fleet. Ships that had been docked at orbital stations were destroyed when those stations exploded. Vessels that had been refueling were caught in the destruction of fuel depots. The mighty Veilrith Armada, which had conquered 100 species, lost half its strength in a single hour. Survivors fled toward the remaining ships, but there was nowhere safe to go. Every planet was dying. Every station was failing. Every base was burning. The infrastructure of a 10,000-year empire was collapsing like a house made of sand. Zorvail's own flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was one of the few major vessels to escape. It had been in orbit over Earth, far from the destruction. But even from this distance, he could see the glow of dying worlds. The night sky was full of new stars, each one a planet in its death throes. "Find out how they did this," Zorvail ordered. "Find out who planned this. Find out everything." His intelligence officers worked frantically, pulling together fragments of intercepted communications and data stolen from human computers. The picture that emerged was horrifying in its patience and its hatred. Protocol Prometheus had begun before the war officially started. When the first Veilrith scout ships arrived in human space, scientists on Earth had already begun planning. They knew they could not win a direct fight, so they planned an indirect one. They planned to lose the war and win the aftermath. Every battle humanity fought was a distraction. Every death was a price paid to buy time. The Resistance never expected to drive the Veilrith away through combat. They only needed to keep the enemy focused on the wrong things. While Veilrith soldiers hunted rebels in ruined cities, human drones slipped through their patrols. While Veilrith commanders celebrated their victories, their worlds were being slowly poisoned. While Zorvail planned his grand execution, he was actually helping his enemies finish their work. The boy, Eli Vance, was not just a victim. He was a weapon, the most important weapon humanity had ever created. His death was the trigger because the humans knew the Veilrith would broadcast it. They knew the signal would reach every corner of the Dominion. They had used their enemy's own cruelty against them. Zorvail felt something he had never felt before in his long life. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of understanding. He finally understood what kind of enemy he had been fighting. The Veilrith had conquered many species, and each one had eventually accepted defeat. They would fight for a while and then surrender when they realized that they could not win. It was logical. It was reasonable. It was how civilized beings behaved. Humans were not civilized, not by Veilrith standards. They did not accept defeat even when defeat was certain. They did not value survival above victory. They were willing to sacrifice anything, even their own children, to ensure their enemies would never enjoy their triumph. This was not a species that could be conquered. This was a species that would rather die standing than live kneeling. And in their dying, they would take everything with them. The fires continued to spread across Veilrith space. Communication networks failed as relay stations were destroyed. Military command structures collapsed as headquarters were wiped out. The greatest empire the galaxy had ever known was being reduced to scattered survivors and burning wreckage. Zorvel stood alone on the bridge of his flagship and watched it all happen. He thought about the boy who had faced death without fear. He thought about the parents who had sacrificed their child for revenge. He thought about a species that had turned its own genocide into a weapon. "What are you?" he whispered to the burning stars. "What kind of monsters are you?" But the stars did not answer. They just kept burning, bright and terrible, a monument to human spite that would be visible across the galaxy for years to come. The Veilrith Dominion had ruled for 10,000 years. In 8 minutes, it had been destroyed. Not by a fleet or an army, but by a dead boy and the love of parents who refused to let his death mean nothing. Somewhere on Earth, in a bunker deep beneath the mountains, a woman named Yellen Vance watched the reports come in. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She just closed her eyes and whispered her son's name. The victory tasted like ash, but it was still a victory. Humanity had survived, barely, brokenly, but they had survived. And their enemies had not. 3 days after the ignition, as survivors had begun calling it, High Commander Zorvel received a transmission on a channel that should not have existed. It came from a frequency that had belonged to General Marcus Vance, the leader of the human resistance who had died 3 years ago. Except, as Zorvel was about to learn, Marcus Vance had not died at all. The message was not a live communication, but a recording, set to be transmitted automatically once certain conditions were met. Those conditions were simple: the death of Eli Vance and the successful activation of Protocol Prometheus. The recording had been waiting patiently in a hidden satellite, ready to deliver one final blow. Zorvel ordered his officers to leave the bridge. He wanted to hear this message alone. Something told him that what he was about to learn would change everything he thought he knew about the war. The screen flickered and Marcus Vance appeared. He looked older than the propaganda images had shown, with deep lines on his face and shadows under his eyes. This was a man who had already sacrificed everything and knew he would sacrifice more. "If you are receiving this message," Vance began, "then my son is dead and your empire is burning. I am not sorry for what we have done. I am only sorry that it was necessary." Zorvel leaned forward, unable to look away from the face of his greatest enemy. "You are probably wondering how we did it," Vance continued. "You are probably searching for the technology that could bring down 37 worlds. You will not find it because the technology is simple. Any species could have built it. The difference is that only humans would have used it." The recording showed images behind Vance, diagrams and charts explaining Protocol Prometheus. It showed the drone factories hidden in underwater caves. It showed the launch systems disguised as debris fields. It showed the 11 years of patient work that had led to this moment. "We knew we could not defeat you in battle," Vance said. "Your ships were too strong, your soldiers too many, your technology too advanced. If we fought you directly, we would lose. So we chose not to fight you directly. We chose to fight a different kind of war." Zorvel felt cold despite the warmth of the bridge. He was beginning to understand the depth of what humanity had done. Every resistance fighter who died was a volunteer, Vance explained. They knew they were not fighting to win. They were fighting to distract. Every battle, every ambush, every act of sabotage was designed to keep your attention focused on us while we prepared the real weapon. The screen showed maps of Velrith space with thousands of tiny lights representing the hidden drones. They were everywhere, embedded in the foundations of every major structure, waiting in the depths of every ocean, nestled in the cores of every world. You thought you were winning because you were killing us, Vance said with something that might have been a smile. But we were not trying to survive. We were trying to make sure you did not survive either. There is a human saying, "If I cannot have the garden, I will salt the earth." Zorvel thought about all the victories his forces had celebrated. Every city they had destroyed, every rebel base they had discovered, every human they had killed. It had all meant nothing. Worse than nothing. It had been exactly what the humans wanted. My son Eli was not a victim, Vance continued, his voice catching slightly. He was a soldier, the bravest soldier I have ever known. We told him the truth when he was 8 years old. We told him that he would have to die so that humanity could live. Do you know what he said? Zorvel shook his head, even though no one could see him. He said he was proud to be chosen. He said he wanted to be the one who saved everyone. He was 12 years old and he understood sacrifice better than your commanders with their 10,000 years of experience. The image of Marcus Vance seemed to look directly at Zorvel, as if the recording could see him. You executed my son on live broadcast because you wanted to send a message. You wanted to show the galaxy that humans are weak, that we can be broken, that defiance is pointless. Instead, you sent the one signal that would activate every weapon we had hidden in your worlds. Vance leaned closer to the camera. You used our child's death to destroy yourselves. You broadcast your own extinction. Every species in the galaxy watched you murder a boy and then watched your empire burn. What message do you think they received? Zorvel had no answer. His throat was too tight to speak even if there had been someone to hear him. I want you to understand something, Vance said. This was not revenge. Revenge is emotional, personal, small. This was justice on a galactic scale. You came to our world and demanded we kneel. You killed millions of our people and called it order. You tortured and enslaved and murdered, and you believed you had the right. You did not have the right. No one has that right. And now you understand what happens when you push a species that refuses to accept your authority. The recording paused, and Vance seemed to be gathering himself for the final part. I will be dead soon, he said. The bunker I am in is designed to destroy itself after this message is sent. I will not live to see what comes next. But I know what comes next because I planned it. Behind Vance, new images appeared. Seed ships launching from hidden bases, carrying colonists and genetic material and the records of human civilization. Escape pods filled with survivors heading to secret locations across the galaxy. The birth of a new humanity rising from the ashes of the old. You tried to destroy us, Vance said. You failed. Humans are like weeds. Cut us down and we grow back stronger. Burn us to ashes and we sprout from the soil. We have sent pieces of ourselves to every corner of the galaxy. Wherever there is a habitable world, humans will eventually find it. Your empire is dead, but humanity will live forever. Vance stood up and looked into the camera one last time. I have one final message for you, Commander. I know you are watching because this recording was sent specifically to your ship. I know you are the one who ordered my son's execution. So I want you to know something personal. My son's last words were chosen carefully. We spent months deciding what he should say. You should not have let us see the stars. Do you understand what that means? Zorvel did not understand. The words had haunted him since he first heard them, but their meaning escaped him. It means that once we knew the universe was full of life, we could never be content with just Earth. It means that once we knew you existed, we would never stop until we had a place among the stars. It means that by showing us what was possible, you guaranteed that we would fight for it. You could have ignored us. You could have passed by our little world and left us alone. But you chose to conquer us. You chose to show us that the strong take what they want. You taught us that lesson very well. The recording began to fade. Goodbye, Commander. I hope you live long enough to see what humanity becomes. I hope you understand that you created us. We were just another species before you arrived. You made us into something that will never be conquered again. Thank you for the lesson. The screen went dark and Zorvel sat alone in the silence of his dying empire. He finally understood what he was facing. Not an enemy, but a mirror. Humanity had become exactly what the Veilrith had always been. They had just become better at it. The Veilrith Dominion did not fall in a single day. It took 3 weeks for the greatest empire in galactic history to completely collapse. But those 3 weeks were the most chaotic and violent the galaxy had ever seen. Without their homeworld, the Veilrith lost their central government. The High Council had been in session when Veilrith Prime began to tear itself apart. Every senior leader, every ancient lawmaker, every keeper of tradition died in the first hour. 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom and authority was swallowed by fire. Fleet commanders who had never made independent decisions suddenly found themselves alone. They had always waited for orders from above. Now there was no above. They did not know what to do, and their uncertainty became panic. Some commanders tried to help the survivors escaping from dying worlds. They filled their ships with refugees and headed for any safe harbor they could find. These were the decent ones, the officers who remembered that they were supposed to protect their people. Others saw opportunity in the chaos. With no one to stop them, they became warlords. They claimed whatever resources they could find and declared themselves the new rulers of whatever territory they could hold. These petty empires lasted days or weeks before collapsing under their own greed. A few commanders simply gave up. They pointed their ships at the nearest star and accelerated until their engines burned out. Dying by their own choice seemed better than watching everything they had built turn to ash. High Commander Zorvel tried to hold things together. He sent messages to every surviving ship, calling for unity and order. He proclaimed himself the emergency leader of the Dominion and demanded that all forces rally to his position. But his authority had died with his empire. "Why should we follow you?" one fleet commander demanded. "You are the one who killed the human child. You are the one who triggered this disaster. If anyone should be executed, it is you." The accusation spread quickly through what remained of the Veilrith military. Zorvel had ordered the broadcast. Zorvel had given the signal. Zorvel had handed humanity the weapon they needed. He was not a leader to rally behind. He was a scapegoat to blame. While the Veilrith tore themselves apart, humanity emerged from hiding. Not as refugees but as inheritors, ready to claim the galaxy their enemies had tried to deny them. Siege ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields and gas giants began their journeys to new worlds. Each ship carried thousands of humans in cryogenic sleep, along with genetic material for millions more. They also carried the complete cultural and scientific archive of Earth. Humanity would not just survive, it would remember. On Earth itself, the survivors began to rebuild. The planet was damaged but not destroyed. The Veilrith had been too focused on controlling humans to actually destroy their world. Now the control was gone and the humans who remained could finally breathe free. Yellen Vance emerged from her bunker 3 days after the ignition. She had watched her husband's final message go out, and she had felt the ground shake as his bunker destroyed itself. She was now the highest-ranking leader of the human resistance, which meant she was the closest thing humanity had to a government. Her first act was to broadcast a message of her own, not to the Veilrith, but to every other species in the galaxy. "This is Yellen Vance speaking on behalf of humanity," she said. "The Veilrith Dominion attacked our world and tried to enslave our people. We defended ourselves. We do not seek to conquer anyone. We do not wish to rule over other species. We only want to live in peace among the stars. But let our response to the Veilrith be a warning. We will never again allow ourselves to be conquered. We will never again kneel before tyrants. Any species that attacks humanity will face the same fate as the Veilrith. We have proven that we are willing to pay any price for our freedom. We hope we never have to prove it again." The message was received across the galaxy, and it changed everything. Species that had lived under Veilrith oppression for centuries saw hope for the first time. Others who had avoided Veilrith attention out of fear realized that the old order was truly dead. The galaxy was being reborn. The Veilrith survivors made one last attempt to save themselves. They gathered their remaining forces at a station called Nexus Point, a military outpost on the edge of known space. From there, they sent desperate messages to every species they had ever contacted. "The humans are monsters," they warned. "They destroyed our entire civilization because we executed one criminal. They have weapons hidden everywhere. If you do not help us stop them, they will come for you next." But the responses they received were not what they expected. The Kreth Collective, a species of hive-minded insectoids, sent a brief reply. "We have studied human history. They only attack those who attack them first. We will not interfere." The Silon Concordat, an ancient species of traders and diplomats, responded. "The humans call what they did proportional response. Considering what you did to them, we are inclined to agree. We suggest you surrender and hope for mercy." The Arvith Remnant, survivors of a species the Veilrith had nearly exterminated centuries ago, simply said, "Your extinction is noted. We find that justice has finally been served. No one was coming to help the Veilrith." The empire that had bullied the galaxy for 10,000 years discovered that it had no friends. Everyone they had oppressed was happy to watch them fall. At Nexus Point, the last Veilrith fleet prepared for a final stand that would never come. Human forces did not attack them. There was no need. The Veilrith were dying anyway, slowly and inevitably, as their supplies ran out and their ships began to fail. Zorvil watched his species fade, and he finally understood the full extent of what humanity had done. They had not just destroyed the Dominion's worlds. They had destroyed its reputation. They had shown the galaxy that the mighty Veilrith could be beaten. They had ended the fear that had kept 100 species obedient. "We ruled through terror," Zorvil admitted to his remaining officers. "We made everyone afraid of us." The humans were not afraid. They were angry. And anger is stronger than fear. One by one, Veilrith ships went dark as their power failed. One by one, survivors surrendered to whoever would take them. The proud conquerors became refugees, dependent on the mercy of species they had once dominated. Some found that mercy. Not all the galaxy's species were cruel. Some remembered that the Veilrith were individuals, not all of them responsible for their empire's crimes. These survivors were given shelter and a chance to start over. Others found justice. On worlds where Veilrith soldiers had committed atrocities, survivors were handed over to those who had suffered. What happened to them was harsh, but perhaps deserved. The galaxy had long memories and deep wounds. The Veilrith Dominion, which had stood for 10,000 years, officially ceased to exist 23 days after a boy named Ely Vance said 7 words and died. It was the fastest collapse of a major power in galactic history. Scholars would study it for centuries, trying to understand how it happened. But the people who lived through it understood perfectly. An empire built on fear could only last as long as the fear. Once someone proved that the fear was misplaced, the Empire had nothing left. Humanity had proven that, and now the galaxy knew the truth. The age of the Velrith was over. The age of humanity was just beginning. 1 year after the ignition, the galaxy gathered on Earth for an event that had never happened before in history. Representatives from 47 different species traveled to the blue world that had somehow defeated the greatest empire ever known. They came to witness the dedication of a monument and to meet the people who had changed everything. Where the city of Geneva once stood, a new structure had risen from the ruins. It was not a tower or a fortress, but a garden, filled with plants from 100 different worlds. At its center stood a statue carved from white stone, depicting a young boy looking up at the stars with defiance in his eyes. The statue showed Ely Vance as he had been in his final moments. Small but unbroken, facing death without fear. Beneath it, a plaque bore words in over 100 languages, one for every species that had sent representatives to the ceremony. Ely Vance, the last soldier of the Prometheus War. You should not have let us see the stars. Ambassador Yellen Vance stood before the gathered delegates. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy or decorated. She did not look like the leader of a species that had just changed the galaxy. She looked like a mother who had lost her son. The delegates watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. This was the woman who had let her child die to save her people. This was the widow of the man who had planned the destruction of 37 worlds. They did not know whether to admire her or run from her. Yellen began to speak, and her voice carried across the garden, amplified by technology that humans had only recently learned to use. Alien translation devices converted her words into languages that clicked and hummed and sang. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I know many of you traveled far, and I know some of you are afraid. You have heard stories about what humanity did. You have seen the burning worlds and the dying fleets. You wonder if we are monsters." The delegates shifted uncomfortably. She was addressing their fears directly, which was not what they had expected. "I will not tell you that we are good or that we are kind," Yellen continued. "I will not pretend that what we did was noble or heroic. We killed billions of beings to save ourselves. We sacrificed our own children to win a war. These are not the actions of angels." A murmur passed through the crowd. Was she admitting to crimes? "But I will tell you why we did it," Yellen said. "Not to justify our choices, but to help you understand us. Because understanding is the only thing that can prevent this from happening again." She turned to look at the statue of her son, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "The Velrith came to our world and demanded submission. They told us we could kneel or die. Many species in this gathering faced the same choice, and you chose to kneel. I do not blame you for that. Survival is precious, and you did what you had to do. But humans could not kneel. It is not in our nature. We have a history of fighting against impossible odds, of dying for freedom rather than living in chains. It is not always rational, but it is who we are." She looked back at the delegates. "When we realized we could not win the war, we did not give up. We changed the kind of war we were fighting. We decided that if we had to die, we would take our enemies with us. And we prepared for 11 years while pretending to be beaten. My son knew his role from the time he was 8 years old. He could have grown up bitter or angry or afraid. Instead, he grew up proud. He believed he was going to save his people, and that belief gave him peace." Yellen's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "I am not here to apologize for what we did. I am here to make you a promise. Humanity does not seek conquest. We do not want to rule the galaxy or dominate other species. We only want to live among the stars, to explore and learn and grow. But we will never allow ourselves to be enslaved again. We have proven what we are willing to do to stay free. We hope we never have to prove it again. That choice is up to you. She paused and looked at each delegation in turn. The Valrith believed they could rule through fear. They were wrong. Fear creates enemies, not allies. We do not want you to fear us. We want you to understand us. And we want to understand you. This monument is not a celebration of victory. It is a reminder of cost. My son died here. My husband died building the weapon that saved us. Millions of humans died in the war that led to this moment. We paid a price that no species should ever have to pay. Let Eli's statue remind everyone who sees it that freedom is not free, that the stars belong to those who are willing to sacrifice for them, that no empire, no matter how powerful, can hold back a people who refuse to be held. She stepped back from the podium and the garden fell silent. Then, slowly, one delegate began to make a sound. It was a creth, clicking its mandibles in what humans had learned was a sign of respect. Others joined in, each species expressing approval in its own way. The galaxy was not applauding the destruction of the Valrith. They were acknowledging something deeper. They were recognizing that a new power had risen, one that could not be intimidated and would not be ignored. In the months that followed, humanity began to take its place in galactic society. They joined councils and signed treaties. They traded technology and shared culture. They proved that they could be good neighbors when they were treated with respect. But they never forgot the lessons of the Prometheus War. Hidden in places no one would ever find, new protocols waited. New weapons slept. New triggers were set. Humanity hoped they would never need them, but they would always be ready. Centuries passed and the story of Eli Vance became legend. Children across the galaxy learned about the boy who had saved his species with 7 words and a brave heart. The Valrith became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened to those who underestimated their enemies. The warning spread from species to species, passed down through generations. Do not provoke the humans. Do not harm their children. Do not make them desperate. Because somewhere in the darkness between stars, there is always another plan, another weapon, another Eli waiting to be the key that opens the gates of fire. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They did not want to. But they were respected in a way that no species had been respected before. They were the ones who had proven that tyranny could be defeated, that no empire was too big to fall, that the small and the weak could triumph over the strong. On Earth, in the garden where Geneva once stood, the statue of Eli Vance looked up at the stars. Tourists from 100 worlds came to see it and to remember. They left flowers and tokens and prayers in languages that humans would never understand. And sometimes, late at night when the garden was empty, the wind would blow through the trees and it almost sounded like a boy's voice, saying the words that had changed the galaxy. You should not have let us see the stars. Humanity had seen the stars and they had claimed them. Not through conquest, but through sacrifice. Not through power, but through will. They had paid the highest price, and they had earned their place. The Valrith were gone, but humanity endured. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.